Hello guys, today I'm going to talk about carbs counting for diabetics. I'm going to speak about why we need to measure our carbohydrates. Um, Also, I will speak about what type of carbohydrates to identify the differences between them and what ways do we have to measure our carbohydrates. If you don't know me, it's your first time here on this channel, welcome. My name is Mihail Burcha. I'm a diabetic type 1 for about 10 years now. On this channel, I make videos which are all about diabetes type 1 management. Good things that I know and also bad things that I know so you can avoid them. Bear in mind, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a diabetic specialist. Everything I say in my videos are my own experiences. If you don't know how to treat your diabetes, don't make any changes without talking to your doctor before. So let's start talking about why it's important to measure the amount of carbohydrates that we are about to eat. Why it's important to count the amount of carbohydrates. So first, carbohydrates for us as diabetics, type 1, diabetics in general, the more carbohydrates we eat, the harder it's going to be for us to bring our blood sugar down. Carbohydrates are spiking our blood sugars, and to bring it back down we need to take insulin either by a pump or via an injection. Knowing the amount of carbohydrates that we are about to eat is helping us as diabetics to achieve great blood sugar. We are able to avoid high blood sugar level and we avoid any spikes, unwanted spikes, which will harm us, and also will avoid any low blood sugars which potentially will make us feel horrible and will put our lives in danger. Having great blood sugar will make us feel good, wonderful. Of course, you don't want to feel awful with high blood sugar levels or being very low. We all know how it is to be outside of good ranges. So that's another benefit, to feel great. It will also help us to be healthy, live a healthier life, and it will help us to achieve a great HbA1c. To be able to properly measure the carbohydrates, the amount of carbohydrates that we are about to eat, we need to know the types of carbohydrates, because we have different type of carbohydrates. We have the type of carbohydrates which they have high glycemic index, medium glycemic index, or low glycemic index. For those of you who don't know, the glycemic index is the speed by which the blood sugar level will increase after we eat the carbohydrates. So it's how quickly our blood sugar will spike after we eat the carbohydrates. The higher the number, the glycemic index, the quicker the blood sugar will spike. The lower the number, the slower the absorption of the glucose will be seen in our blood sugars. For a great measurement of our carbohydrates, we need to master these two numbers: the amount of carbohydrates present in the food we are about to eat and the glycemic index. Knowing these two numbers very well, we will be able to achieve great blood sugar levels. Many people are still making confusion, but it's not that hard. So just one more time, we have the amount, how much carbohydrates we have in that specific food, and then we have the speed of the carbohydrates which are going to get into our blood sugars. I'm going to give you a few examples to make it easier. So vegetables in general, they have low amount of carbohydrates and they have a low glycemic index, with very few exceptions. So if you eat lettuce or you eat tomatoes, you'll be safe. The amount of carbohydrates is quite low. For tomatoes, we have 4 grams of carbohydrates per 100 grams of tomatoes, and the glycemic index is not too high. So if you eat them, you are not going to see a quick spike in the blood sugar, and also you need to eat a lot to see that spike. For instance, if you eat a grapefruit, the glycemic index is 25, which is considered low, and you won't have a spike in the blood sugar. So these are quite safe fruits and the food to eat. Then we have foods like potatoes, baked potatoes for instance, which they have the glycemic index 85, which is considered high. So that means if you eat a baked potato now, in the next probably 30 minutes, depends if you eat the plain baked potatoes or if you mix it with something else, that the mixture affects also the absorption speed. But if you eat the plain baked potatoes, to make it simple, that is going to create a great spike in the blood sugar, and in about 30 minutes time, and to counter that is going to be a lot harder comparing to some food which is having a low glycemic index. To make it even harder, let's say the baked potato you eat, actually it's quite a big one, so you eat 300 grams of baked potatoes because you really like them, no? The potato is having 20% carbohydrates, so you'll have about 60 grams of carbohydrates with a glycemic index of 85. That will create a really significant spike in your blood sugar level. So if you want to counter that, it's going to be a lot harder. The only way to do it is to take the insulin shot to bolus for the food, let's say 30 minutes or even a little bit earlier, to make sure you counter that spike. But when you do it, you have to take a lot of insulin, and then probably you won't be able to counter that spike totally, and then you will have a drop in the blood sugar. That's why it's better to avoid great amounts of high glycemic carbohydrates. So the higher the glycemic index, and especially higher glycemic index with a high amount of carbohydrates, it's better to eat less amount. It's safer. We still can have them, but the more you have, the more risk you take to control your blood sugar levels. Then we have lower glycemic index and medium glycemic index numbers with a small or medium amount of carbohydrates. These are quite safe foods to eat if you know the amount and you measure properly the amount of carbohydrates that you eat, which we'll discuss further. You should be able to have a pretty good control of your blood sugar levels. Now let's talk about the way we can measure the carbohydrates. So we have the classic way of doing it by scale, where we can do it by reading the label. Both of these forms are pretty safe and very exact, so they will give you a very accurate number, which is very good for our blood sugar level control. For those of you who don't know, by scale is pretty much self-explanatory. You put together all the food you are about to have to eat, you plan to eat, and start to scale it separately. So let's say you have some meat with vegetables, and you have a dessert, some fruits. So first you measure your vegetables, you put them on the scale, you see what's the amount you have, and then you calculate how many carbohydrates do you have per 100 grams, and you make the calculation, you know how much carbs you have in those vegetables. Then meat, you don't need to do it because you don't have carbohydrates in the meat, you just have protein. But it's good to measure the protein as well, because you have to bolus for that as well a little bit. I'm going to talk about that in another video, how to bolus for protein, because any protein is bringing it's affecting our blood sugar levels as well. It's not as much as the carbohydrates, but still some numbers will be seen in our blood sugars. And then you move to the dessert, to the fruits. So let's say you have 1 apple and 2 peaches, and you put that on a scale. You put the apple, you see how heavy is the apple, and you calculate the amount of carbohydrates, and then you move to the peaches and you measure them and so on, and then you calculate how many grams of carbohydrates do you have in total, and you bolus for them, and you wait about 15-20 minutes, and you start to eat. The other way of measuring is by label, and by this I mean if you buy foods which are in a container, let's say yogurt, you read the label, and the most important thing, because very many people are getting confused about that, you need to look at the carbohydrates, not the sugars, because some of them from which sugars. No, you just look at the carbohydrates content, and you have to look at the carbohydrates content per 100 grams. If you cannot find that per 100 grams, they should have it per serving. Depends how big the serving is, and you calculate how much you are about to eat, and you'll find out how much carbohydrates you are about to eat. I'm going to attach some pictures from as an example for label, yogurt label, so you can see as well. These two measurements option I've told you about, which is labeling and scaling, are very precisely and are really good. We all use them, and I use them as well, and they are great. But there is another way, easier way, and this works great if you are fed up of carbs counting, and it's really great. I use it, and I'm going to talk about it just now. This is called, what I call it, guessing, but this is how it works. Let's say to have success with this method, you need to first start with measuring, like the classic way, the food you eat, either by labeling or either by scaling. But you need to have same type of foods, so you don't always eat something else. I assume you'll at one point you'll have some favorite foods you always like to eat, so you just go and scale that food you really like to do, and you measure the same amount of foods that you eat. So you take the food you really like, your favorite food, you start by measuring it the classic way, and you'll figure out how much you need for a meal. Once you figure out how much you need, you can see how much is it in the food without scaling it. So you can become pretty good at it if you do it. So you know in a big plate how much part is going to be vegetable, how much is going to be meat, how many apples, how big is the apple, how many walnuts, how many peanuts, or whatever the food is. Knowing that, you can estimate pretty good, and you can from previous meals, when you achieve great blood sugar by measuring it precisely, you'll know how much insulin you need for that. So let's say if you measure for like 2-3 weeks, and you manage to have great blood sugar levels for that specific food, and you needed 12 units of fast-acting insulin, you put it in the plate, you've seen how much is in the plate just with eye measurement, and you do it again, and you take the same amount of insulin, 12 units of insulin, and you'll see you'll be pretty close. For me, it's working really great. This is how I actually do it, because I'm not changing the foods. Actually, to make this work properly, this is the main important thing. You don't need to change foods. You can change sizes. If you slightly eat more in one day than whatever you put in the plate, you take another shot, one more unit of insulin, or depends how is your ratio. If you eat less, you take a little bit less insulin. So it's gonna work like that. But if you continuously switch foods, you will have to actually measure it, either by labeling or by scaling. Otherwise, it's gonna be just a guess, and you have great chances to not achieve good numbers. For me, this is great. I use it, especially if you are fed up of carbs counting. After a while, you know what you eat, you know what you like, and you don't need to do it, and you will achieve really great results. So in this video, I talked about how important is to measure our carbohydrates, what type of carbohydrates do we have, and the importance to know how to distinguish them, and the ways we could use to measure the carbohydrates, which I split in 3: by scale, using the label, and by guessing, which is actually learning and using the same amount of foods and same foods. This is the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please give me a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, leave some comments below with any topics you want me to talk about. Leave some comments on how you do it, how to count your carbs, or if you count them. Thank you for watching, and see you again next time.